It is my absolute pleasure to welcome my friend, Beth Rachel, to the podcast. Welcome, Beth. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Emily. It's good to be here.
Yeah, Beth is an intuitive channel, a shadow alchemist, an energy educator, and a multidimensional healer. And we are going to be exploring this topic of alchemy of shadow and embodiment of soul, and what that means, and really providing practical tools that can lead to a greater sense of embodiment and healing. And it is my prayer and intention that this conversation be received by all those who need to receive this wisdom with the highest love, light, healing, miracles available. Mm. So I want to start by asking you about a little bit about your journey. You have such a powerful story, and just your process of really alchemizing shadows and turning that into purpose and what you're doing in the world today.
Yeah. Well, I came into this life, a starseed like many, and I came into this life with a very conscious intent of sort of winning the war and a conscious relationship with my Syrian family and a conscious awareness that I would be stepping into a big chunk of shadow and really the depth of how shadow is operating here in the world, because I had such a big intention of breaking it down, right? So I like really went into the belly of it, which meant how it manifested in the physical world, coming into a family very rich in abuse in all forms, and cult affiliated. I was sexually trafficked as a child, and what was probably most, well, it's all profound, but was the government shadow experiments that I was a part of. And my relationship between those shadow experiments and a group of light beings, of fellow starseeds and light beings who I called the Light Workers Network Alliance was the word that I was given. And that is what would be known today as the white hats, essentially, and consisting of positive ETs, some of our military that's aligned with the light, and some inner earth being network to sort of pop me in and pop me out, and fix me up sometimes as well when I can fix myself up. So I stepped in with that experience and that reality. And, I think that many of us are aware that there is this sort of war, energy between light and dark going on, shadow and light, however you want to say it. And we could go into as much or little detail about that as you want. But I think that many of us that are in the spiritual community are aware that that is very much what is happening. And, the desire to shift out of that. I think sometimes, it gets missed that this extends beyond our planet. And, these warring frequencies are universal. And a lot of the star seeds coming in are coming in, to try to help shift it here because it's happening everywhere. It's just that human consciousness, we're sort of the infants, and so our consciousness is quite a bit more susceptible to a lot of the manipulations and distortions. So, that's I think why we get a lot more support coming in, and why so many more star seeds come in all the time. And then you have, the shadow that are very aware of all of the star seeds coming in, and they watch for them and look for them and, do everything they can to keep them from reaching their full potential expressed selves, because they don't want things to change, right? So I played that game, moving back and forth between the light and the dark, doing my best to help win, at at great self-sacrifice. There's a big self-sacrifice piece in there for me, and quite a bit of victimization as well. And then when I was about 15, I had an experience during one of these government experiments, where I was brought to Antarctica. Many people know that there are secret bases in Antarctica. Some of them actually go underground. There's different levels of awareness around that. And we can go more into any of these subjects. But for this particular mission, the program that, so I, entering into, was in a hypnotic mind control state. They almost always use some type of drug along with that. And so the program to go, I was sent under the ice to attempt to gain access to an ancient device. This was not their first attempt. It wasn't even their first attempt with me, actually, but they know it doesn't work for them to touch it. So they want someone who has some Syrian DNA, essentially, is what needs to happen, because the device was created by Syrians. So I have Syrian DNA. I also have Pleiadian DNA. That's part of why I was targeted in the first place, right? So during this experience, when I came in contact with this piece of technology, ancient technology, I did not, completely did not. The mission was like, no, that's not happening, completely different experience, which was that, I was instantly awakened from the hypnotic state that I was in, the mind control state that I was in. And not only that, but I was instantly taken, it's almost, similar to a near-death experience, which I've had many of, but similar to that, in that I was instantly taken to my soul and instantly taken to my soul's connection with source. And I was shown the original design and blueprint of the planet. And I was shown how our original genetic coding as well, and how the two align, and sort of the original vision of the planet, right? Just like really brought back to that in my cells, because I was present for that original seeding too. But my own soul and my own, even the Syrian peoples, like everyone has gotten so far away from that original design in this struggle to sort of, win. So I was shown all that, and I was really reminded on that soul level that I didn't have to do this anymore, that I could change all of this right now, that I could let go of, shift, and change any of these contracts I had, and I could do it completely differently. And so I made that choice. And, that was sort of the end of one saga. I'll say that. Yeah. And I'll just leave it there for a moment. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing your story. It is so powerful. And for me, I have chills as you're talking about, contacting with that device and the profound impact that it had on you, and shift that occurred. And I feel like anybody who's listening, whether they have, a conscious or a subconscious awareness of, some of the things that you're describing and sharing about, there is just this knowing that, we are a part of something much, much bigger, and that it is through our choices in every now moment that really has a profound ripple impact on our lives and the entire universe and beyond. And so I love how you share about really, the idea that change is possible, and change can happen quickly at times as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so I'd love to just kind of dive in and explore from there. You know, one of the things that I'm really curious is about this concept of shadow work. I feel like it's something that we hear about so often. And at the same time, you know, it has become somewhat of a buzzword, and you and I have, you know, talked about this. But what does shadow work really mean to you? And how can we begin to start to, you know, look at some of those places and spaces that are a little bit tender or that maybe have been ignored?
Yeah. You know, I think the simplest way that I could say it is it means diving into that 90%, right? You know, and the not not all of the material in there is uncomfortable or shadow, but certainly, you know, that's where it's stored. We may see reflections of it in our outer life, but it's, you know, it's that inward journey, it's that inward experience where we see sort of the root of it. So for me, when I, you know, think of shadow as it's anywhere where we would rather not be. You know, it's anything there, like where our, you know, that's our initial reaction is that's uncomfortable, that's scary, it doesn't feel good. And we have such deep programming around the polarities, right? If it's not good, it's bad. If it's not good, it's maybe even evil. And so as soon as something doesn't feel good, we put it in that category of bad or wrong, right? If it's not right, then it's wrong. And it's automatically over there. We're so deeply programmed as a group consciousness to put anything bad, wrong, evil in the other part. And so I think the first step really, you know, is judgment.
Mm.
And it's easier said than done to come from a place of, you know, neutrality and not looking at things in terms of how we think we should feel or how we've been taught to feel or think. But it is sort of the part of the goal, right? And if you can't, and it's also not necessary too, because we're not going to judge the ability to not judge either. You know, it's like we're at where we're at in our journey, but our willingness is the biggest piece. I think our willingness is the biggest piece to sit, you know, next to the part of us that doesn't feel good, sit next to the shadow and befriend it and embrace it. And for me, I really feel that the more that we can do that, the more wholeness it brings to us, because it's already part of our reality. It's just the unconscious or the ignoring, it leaves a part of us always outside of ourselves. You know, the shadow of ourselves is still part of ourself. It's part of our wholeness. And oftentimes within these sort of deeper shadow pieces, uh, we find the biggest gems of ourselves. You know, through the darkest shadow comes the brightest light. And that's where, you know, we've talked about, I refer it to as the diamonds, retrieving the diamonds of our soul. And it really does appear that way when you're doing deep shadow work with someone and you complete a process with them and call back the soul fragments. And it's like diamonds returning to the self and to this body in this present time and in place. And it can be harrowing to go through those journeys, you know, and I think having it in mind that the intention is for more wholeness of the self and gaining more access of the wholeness of what your soul is capable of. I think that's the motivating factor. And so, yeah, I mean, it being a buzzword is a little bit tricky, but you know, I think it just takes in the willingness to listen a little bit further. And for me, in the field of unity consciousness, shadow is part of everything. It's all part of. So leaving anything out is the lack of wholeness. So
Yeah, it's so true. And, I'm just thinking about my own personal journey, and it's like any of the places and spaces that I've been more tender or vulnerable or really hard to look at have been the greatest gifts, the greatest blessings. And I feel like sometimes, people get afraid or resistant because there's a feeling of I'll lose myself in this emotion. I'm not sure what's on the other side of this emotion that's coming up. And that's where I feel like sometimes, this idea of maybe spiritually bypassing is where it's a fear or an unconscious belief of not really being ready or wanting to look at some of those tender places. But I feel like in that awareness of what you're sharing is that first step is like really an appreciation of meeting everything with a level of awareness, a level of, investigation of what's coming up for me. What am I seeing and experiencing? And then allowing that, to go deeper. I think it's true, like, the saying that you can only meet another as deep as you've met yourself is so true.
absolutely, absolutely. And there's a couple other pieces I would speak to, and one is that people who have experienced their shadow is a certain depth of trauma, which is more people than we think. There's a lot of different types of trauma and abuse in this world, and a lot of people have actually experienced it and repressed it.
And
And
how would you define trauma?
yeah, that's a very good question. I would define it as anything that is so much for the mind, and it's mostly the mind in that moment in time, the mind, the psyche, to take in at one time, that it actually will dissociate to some degree or another. And that can be either, it's oftentimes something physical happening to the body. And it doesn't have to be an abuse either. It can be a terrible car accident, or it can be, but I do want to, sort of pull the veil off for people as to the depth of abuses that are happening, and that is part of our suppression. That is part of our suppression of humanity, is these levels and depths of violation and abuse that go on. And so there's one of the things there is that for some people, when they start to step into looking at, oh, what is this reflecting for me, right? And they want to go inward, and they want to embrace the shadow and embrace the discomfort. But there's something truly terrifying there. That's important to listen to, because that's telling you that there's a bigger piece there than you probably think or know, and it would be good to get some support. It's not always a great idea to go into these things alone, and that working with the human psyche is it's sensitive territory, and we need to do it in work with it in a loving, caring way, and really acknowledge it for its own consciousness and wisdom, in that it gives you the pieces that you're ready to get as you're ready to get them. And when we're talking about expanding consciousness, with each piece that you're getting, as far as if you do have repressed trauma, you also are simultaneously receiving a piece, that soul piece, which then expands the consciousness. And that's the alchemy, right? It's this simultaneous action that's happening. And the other piece about that is that, just to say, for the consciousness of the world, for the conscious versus unconscious, I think it's really important, are awakening, they're becoming awake, and they're seeing some of these distortions and these programs in the media and they're starting to make some of these connections as to dive even a little bit deeper, even
Mhm.
a little bit deeper, and start to really kind of ask questions of and what's going on underneath, and how did we get there, and what's going on underneath, and how did we get there, just as we would for ourselves, you know.
Yeah, so much there that I want to explore, and I want to get to the support piece and, maybe some tools. But what are some indicators that maybe shadow work needs to take place? I'm assuming like depression and anxiety might be some like key indicators, but what else comes up?
Yeah, absolutely. Depression and anxiety, dysfunctional relationships, especially if they keep occurring, um, angry outbursts, um, having a hyper aroused or hypo aroused system. So, this is one that gets missed a lot, is that people who have a difficult time getting in touch with their emotions is actually an indication that there's some pretty deep shadow work to do.
Like, for
Um,
example, if you ask somebody what they're feeling and they're having a hard time putting their finger on what it is that they're actually feeling in that moment.
yeah, or they need a lot of time to figure it out, right? They're like, give me, an hour or so, whatever it is, or the people that you see, spending like an hour. This is a simple question, but it's like, okay, uh, because they can't figure out where they orient within that. It takes them time. Uh,
And that would be an example of hypo arousal.
yeah, and a big part of piece of that usually for people is anger, in particular, people who are unwilling to or uncomfortable with expressing anger, um, and have a judgment around that. And you can almost, if you're sensitive, you can like feel, it's those people, you can feel that they're angry, right? But they won't admit that they're angry. It's like that, is a big one.
Because it hasn't been safe to express and feel that emotion.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah,
And then
yeah.
hyper arousal would be sort of the opposite, I'm guessing, where it's like a trigger where you go to heightened emotions very quickly.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
And can tend to be, have like uh, little explosions, like, because your nervous system is so sensitive and so wired for so the small thing becomes a big thing very quickly.
Yeah. I think this is so helpful for people to tune into and, feel within themselves because sometimes, we look at things that are happening and we look externally. And you and I were, chatting about this a little bit beforehand is like, you know, in working with a lot of spiritual entrepreneurs, when we look at business or anything that we're desiring to create, whether it's a business or whether it's a relationship, we can look at the thing out there, but in truth, it's really a mirror of what's going on inside. And so when we're not feeling the flow or we're not feeling a sense of peace, it's like really an invitation to go deeper within.
Absolutely. If for whatever reason you're not getting the results or reflection in your life, that you desire, that your heart desires, then it's an invitation to drop in.
Yeah, and I feel like we can always go deeper. I want to share that, my experience in having a session with you and, connecting in that way was just, we talked a little bit about visibility, and it's something that I've struggled with. Listeners know I've shared it on the podcast and I've done, work around it. But just even so, being in that space with you and exploring, it's like really recognizing that there's, deeper areas and, little fine threads that we can kind of dig into and explore. And as you share, those are really the diamonds for us.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And that's not to say also that, like shadow work is a bottomless pit, or, I don't want people to feel like discouraged in that way. It's that it's happening, again, it's simultaneously happening where we're going into the depths and we're receiving there's an exchange, in other words.
Yes, and I think you described that so beautifully, is that we're really retrieving a fragment of ourselves. So
Absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah.
and there is this continuum. So it's not like we need to go in this never-ending quest, spend months doing shadow work, and it's just what is coming up in this now moment. You know, life is the ultimate teacher. It's like, what is there for us to explore?
Absolutely. And for some people that have more material than others, that's kind of a math, just simple math. You're probably going to spend more time retrieving, but it also means you're receiving more. So
That's a great way of looking at it. That's a great way of looking at it. For those, I know we talked a little bit about the support piece, and I want to get into some maybe practical tools, but I know, just having a safe container, whether it's a professional or, creating your own sacred, safe space to do this healing work, I feel like is so important to be held and to feel, that trust that's there within ourselves or within anybody that we're, participating in this work. So what are some suggestions that you have there?
yeah, well, I think, more and more every day we're getting, people are becoming more proficient at holding space for individuals processing shadow work. But certainly choosing, if you're going to choose a person, choosing someone to hold the space that is that's going to believe you, first of all, that's for whatever your material is going to hold your truth as sacred. And because if the container isn't, if they're not believing, then the container's not big enough for whatever you need to
Mm-hmm.
process. So
Yeah.
that's important, and that you feel safe with them. um, those are the two, I would say, biggest things as far as picking an individual. And also, of course, what is their proficiency level in assisting with supporting the shadow transformation. And if it's trauma, then what are, not so much like what are your credentials, but talk to them a little bit about how they work and what ways would they support you. And it's another way to create safety within the psyche, because the inner parts of you hear these things and like, okay, yeah, okay. um, and then that's the other piece, as far as building self. I feel like such a key component for everyone is, no matter your level of shadow, is to build a relationship with the inner self. And we have different parts in our inner world, and that's also kind of become a little bit of a catch phrase, or it's a little bit like highlighted, like, oh, your parts. And that it can get complicated, or it can be very simple. I would not, tell everyone has different inner parts, is what I would say. Not everybody has the same archetype or the same, everybody's going to have, an inner child, I would say,
Uh-huh.
and a protector. Those are the two things that I would say always show up.
And
You
what's a
might have,
protector? I feel like most are familiar with the inner child.
yeah, okay. And you might have multiple of both, especially depending on how much trauma or shadow you've experienced. There might be an inner child of every age, for instance. The
Mm-hmm.
protector is a part of the psyche that has appointed itself the decider of what feels safe. And it might not tell you, like, just tell you, right? So that's why building this relationship is important, because one of the ways that it would show up is like, you get triggered, it's that hyper arousal. I'm just going to get angry, or I'm just going to respond, or, that's the protective, defensive, kind of always on guard self. But it also works in the way that if you start to really build the relationship, that protector can, obviously you want all of these parts to be allies, right? But the protector part can really be a supportive ally in helping you and the other parts inside of you, inside your psyche, to sort of gauge what's going to be the sort of the healthiest amount, of something to process at a time.
Yes. That makes sense. I guess as you're sharing, I'm thinking about ego. Like, would there be a correlation there?
Yes, oftentimes there is, but not like a straight, like it's not the same thing.
Okay.
But can often be that part can often be more caught up in ego.
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing that I think is important for people to know, just as we're talking about parts, I always like to mention that, you know, because I feel like this gets missed in the parts conversation, that, you know, we all have different parts inside of us, inside our psyche. And then some people have all. And this is actually a lot more common than most people think. And it doesn't display itself as we, you know, are traditionally shown, like 1 minute one person's this way and then the next, you know, they're this way and they have no idea how, you know, how they got there, or, you know, this sort of amnesia piece, and a complete shift. For a lot of people, they have developed these alters, or, you know, in some cases they have actually been programmed into them, and they don't really often fully express themselves unless they're triggered deeply by something, or if it's a program part, then it's triggered by a program.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't often always fully express themselves, but you can see little blips of them come out, and I can see them intuitively within someone's psyche, and I can see those parts when they come out. So, you know, I mention it because when you see that, or if you know that about yourself, then you want to take extra care in how you work with yourself, or who you choose as a support to work with you, because it's an indicator that there are deeper levels of trauma. And so, you know, just extra care, extra presence, extra ability to hold an expansive space.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And if somebody is listening to this and they're like, I know I have these parts within me and I want to get, you know, deeper in contact and connection with them, like what would you recommend to go about, you know, that discovery process?
Yeah. There are some simple practices. If you have most people, I think, listening probably have some type of meditation practice. And if you don't, then, you know, just deep breathing to kind of get you into a calm or relaxed state. But whatever methodology you use, getting into that calm, relaxed state, and just visualizing going inside yourself and asking. So if there's something specific going on, you know, then you can ask for the part of you that knows or has something to share about that specific issue. Could they please come forward? And if there's some, you know, reluctance, then, you know, maybe make sure they know that it's safe. Make sure they know that you're here to hear them, and support them, and you want to help with this. You want to, you know, be supportive to this, and allow the dialogue to open from there.
I love that. And I imagine too, and I know for myself personally, like automatic writing is such a powerful tool with that.
That was the next thing I was going to suggest. Yeah.
Yeah, because when you're in that deep, relaxed state, you know, you're able to just, and even asking a question and just journaling on that question and seeing which part wants to come forward and express.
Yeah, that was exactly the next piece I was going to share. And it's also not important to know what this part is necessarily either. You know, like, you don't need to know if it's your inner child, if it's a protector, if it's a, you know, if it's an altar. It's just relax, receive the information.
Because essentially you're getting more connected with all aspects of yourself. You know, you're getting to know yourself on a deeper level. That really is, you know, a self-inquiry process that you can begin to develop and, you know, start to go deeper within yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I want to talk a little bit about people pleasing. You know, I know that you mentioned a little bit about hypo arousal, which is, you know, that feeling of not feeling comfortable expressing your anger. You know, I know just there have been a lot of recovering people pleasers, myself included, that tune into the show. And I want to just talk to that aspect a little bit and how that might show up related to trauma. And then also what are some, strategies to really start to, express your anger and emotions in a healthy way.
Yeah. People pleasing stems from the fear of other people's reactions. So whether that is, that you had an abusive childhood, or some people that are just very, very sensitive and feel everything so profoundly that the only tools they have, figured out is that, like, just make sure everybody's happy. And then, I don't have to feel all these things all the time. So that's, I would say, the main sort of categories of why this is created. And then there's also, society, and this is not to necessarily create that third category, although maybe it is, but society has such heavy, deep programming around this, right? There's certainly, especially for women,
Mm-hmm.
there has historically been a lot of programming around, not rocking the boat, not stirring things up, keeping quiet. And a lot of women have learned generationally through witnessing their mothers in abusive situations or abusive marriages. They've learned to then be a people pleaser by proxy, mm-hmm. right? So there's that piece to the consciousness. But like most pieces, of the shadow, first the awareness, right? First, okay, this is, I recognize that this is happening. But I think with people pleasers, something that is really important, and, this, I can speak to this from personal experiences, what actually really figuring out, like, what feels good to you and what doesn't. Because after a lengthy time, and this is because this is an extension of our empathic sense, right? And it's an overuse of the empathy center. And so over time, we really start to mesh what feels good to us and attach it to and entangle it with what feels good to another.
Mm-hmm.
Want, right? And really, it seems like this should be easy, but it's often not, and I can remember a time not that long ago where I was doing some project, and I was supposed to make it a goal, like the step-by-step process of how I wanted to achieve this deepest desire. And I was like, I don't know what my deepest desire is. Of all these feelings of, like, what I'm obligated to do, obligated to feel. And I have no idea what I actually want, so it's like peeling back those layers of, and starting to get some tools and skills, I think, for people pleasers is really important, especially because oftentimes there's that over expanded empathetic sense. So really learning just basic energy tools of, like, what does my energy feel like? What does that person's energy feel like? I do this with kids, is it's like, okay, you're feeling this energy in your body, your belly hurts. Okay. Does it feel like it's yours, or like you picked it up? Like, is it something that's bothering you about a situation, or maybe you're holding on to for somebody else, or is it something that's actually bothering you? And if they can't really tell, then it's like, okay, well, what color, is that? And what color are you? Or is it the same, or is it different? So just kind of really sort of like really breaking these things down to basic skills so that you can really start to get a feel for what's yours and what's not. And then from there, working through any obligations, feelings of responsibility, obligation to another, because we're really only here, we can only live for ourselves. We can only, have our own expressions. We can support each other, but that's, a difference.
That's so helpful. So helpful. I think, just in discovering what it is that makes you happy, what is your own energy, and then following that, following your own truth and, discovery of, yeah, this doesn't feel good for me. So I'm going to say no. I'm going to feel comfortable expressing that.
Yeah. And working, there will be some layers around comfort around no, finding that sacred no and feeling comfortable with it. And probably some work to do around guilt and shame as well, around setting those boundaries. But,
yeah, people pleasing goes deep. I feel like there's a lot of layers there. And as you're sharing, I'm like, oh, yeah, there's a lot that's there for us that we can dive into and explore. And like you said, I mean, it just all comes back around because all of this truly is a greater integration and a greater expression of ourselves.
Yeah. And people pleasing also has the fear of punishment often attached to it,
Yeah.
So
totally makes sense. Yeah. What about the nervous system and the endocrine system? How are those impacted by trauma, and how can shadow work help?
Yeah. Well, both of these systems process all of the trauma, right? So the nervous system is kind of a no-brainer, no pun intended, but it's taking in everything that we are experiencing. And so when it is taken to these any kind of extreme level, then and it doesn't have a chance to sort of detox that, then it gets stored in there. And then the adrenal system is linked because of our fight or flight response. People that have experienced a lot of trauma are always ready to go. And that's both the nervous system and the endocrine system. They're ready to go. They're ready that, nothing ever feels settled. As soon as you drop in, something else happens. And as you start to work through layers of trauma and shadow, you start to allow the nervous system and the endocrine system these opportunities to sort of detox these imprinted experiences and flush the system on kind of an energetic level and release that stored imprint.
That makes so much sense because we're releasing hormones if we're stressed or if we're in a state of fight or flight. So of course it has impact, especially on those systems. And I imagine the more healing, the more state of calmness and peace and serenity, it just has an incredibly healing effect on those systems as well.
Absolutely. And the more that we process and integrate the shadow and work through releasing the trauma, we also learn to start to feel what it feels like to have a regulated nervous system, for it to have kind of a 0 point within itself.
Yes, that's so true. That is so true. One thing that I want to explore and ask you about, I know that there's a lot of light workers, starseeds, healers that, watch this show. And what I've noticed that sometimes there's a tendency or there's such a strong desire to be of service in the world that sometimes taking a break or, like what we say, like putting the oxygen mask on ourselves or, taking a break to really take time to discover or to really address anything that's coming up can be like, oh, I'll do that later, or I don't have time, or, but talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, self-care and self-love, right? And needing to prioritize that. And I think it comes back to remembering that it is your dedication to your inner journey that's going to have the biggest impact on the group consciousness. So giving yourself that love and care is first and foremost for that reason, because tending to your sort of inner garden is is what's going to, help shift the outer reflection of that.
That's beautiful. And I think you're such a beautiful example of that. I mean, you're here assisting in such profound ways. And I know just from knowing you that you do take time to really go on your own journey, to explore, to do the deeper work. And I feel like that's such a testament. And, you want to be in, an experience in that work with somebody that's really met themselves and done that work and continues to, because it's never ending, right?
Yep, exactly. It's a continuous journey. Yeah, for all of us.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, Beth, this has been such an amazing, helpful conversation. Thank you for everything that you're sharing and bringing forward and helping to really awaken and help heal humanity. Any last words of wisdom that you'd like to leave listeners with today?
Yeah, just to, be gentle with yourselves. Be courageous and go into the depths, and also be gentle with yourselves. I think that that's something that we forget.
I love that. Yeah, it is. It's the grace, it's the allowing, yeah, the gentleness.
Yeah, remembering to take things in stride.
It's beautiful. And I know that your website is bethrachel.com, and you have an Oracle series that you host weekly. What else? What are some ways that people can work with you?
Yeah, certainly we can work one-on-one. And I like to do, a series of sessions because of the way that I work, to really kind of work through the levels of consciousness and integration. And I also am going to be doing a course for women starting in September called Lightworkers Alchemizing Shadow. And it's centered on a worker who has done a lot of work, and has gotten to a certain point and is sort of feeling like they're right on the precipice of something, but there's, a block. Or they just can't quite figure out how to move forward. So that's going to be a really focused, grounded group process, where we are really unwinding what is the plateau and stepping into further service and further self-love and integrating more of that soul, really embodying those pieces, bringing in the galactic lineage and the soul fragments and the galactic DNA. And so that starts in September, and then there'll be some classes in October as well that you'll see on the website, for everyone. There's a kids class coming up, parent-child class coming up, and there's a tools class coming up, a systems and tools class coming up for light workers who are either sort of just coming into themselves and there's just a sea of information out there and they just would like some framework, or for the light worker that's been going for a while, but would just like to be able to hone their skills more. So those are some of the things coming up.
Exciting, beautiful. Yeah, I highly, you guys, I highly recommend working with Beth and just really doing this work in general. I find that it is so important, especially for those that have, feel called to be doing work in the world and being of service. It's really starting within, because our energy, our vibration is really truly the greatest gift that we bring to humanity. And it just has such a profound ripple effect. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much for who you are, for your wisdom, for what you bring here to the collective. It's such a beautiful gift.
Yes, thank you. I'm so happy to share, really, truly. So
yeah, and for everybody listening, if you found this conversation beneficial, please share it with a friend, somebody that you think would benefit from, this topic, this exploration. And as always, just sending you all so much love, so much gratitude, and look forward to connecting with you next time.